slice of life. There's no doubt you've heard a lot of talk from both sides of the climate change debate. That's by design. They've each spent tens of millions of dollars to change public policy and public opinion. But while each side argues about why climate change is happening, the science is clear that it is happening. Are we too far gone to do anything about it, though? And what's the real impact it has on you and your wallet? Well, right now, we're going to find out. And as always, we'll break down the issues in facts, figures, dollars and cents. I'm joined by a panel of brilliant experts trying to answer this question: what is the business of climate change? Somewhere between $66 and $106 billion. That's the amount of US coastal property that's projected to end up below sea level by 2050. And by the 22nd century, that number is expected to jump to somewhere between $238 and $507 billion. Kim, that's happened in just the space of 35 years, right? What can you tell us about the pace of this change?
The pace of this change of sea level rise and the storms that are happening that cause that kind of damage, it hasn't been seen before. More and more people are vulnerable. We have communities, businesses, so many people living in coastal areas. There's some suggestions that by 2100, a storm that does the amount of damage, flooding, of Sandy could be a lesser storm, a smaller storm, but happen every other year.
John, why is this happening?
It's happening partly because of climate change, obviously. But these are not problems that we haven't seen before.
Yeah.
I mean, in the past century, the sea level rise we're talking about here now by mid-century is about 1 foot. Well, in the past century, the sea level in New York City has risen by 1 foot. And yet we haven't lost shoreline. We've actually gained land. We've gained a lot of land around lower Manhattan. I mean, these are real problems, but they're problems that we can cope with.
And what are some of the health consequences of climate change?
Well, it's tough because there's already been an increase in heat waves, in the intensity, the frequency, the duration of heat waves, not just in the US, but internationally. It's not just an inconvenience, but people die from the heat.
The thing that really matters on health is how rich you are. For instance, there used to be more people dying in heat waves in New York City in the 1960s than there are now. And it's not because the temperature was cooler, it's because we have air conditioning now.
The irony, though, with that is that if you convince more people to just buy more air conditioners, you're doubling down on the problem, right? You're creating more pollution to create more climate.
But you're saving lives.
You're saving some lives, but for people who can't afford air conditioning, what happens to them? They're now suffering twice as much because you have these people whose the solution is just to give everybody a free air conditioner.
Well, everybody will get them at the rate we're going there.
Everyone's going to get it. That's your solution to climate change?
Yes, yes.
I can't agree with that. I think the one silver lining...
Let people die in the heat? Is that your solution?
No, my solution actually is to support the policies that reduce the pollution and increase the resilience that prevent these deaths in the first place, and then also help prevent future generations from suffering from the worst of these impacts and try to solve the problem altogether.
Right, let's agree to disagree on that one. We'll come back to it. But for now, let's move on. You may have your doubts about climate change, but maybe that's because there's been a lot of money spent to make you question the facts. Take a look at this. $558 million. That's the amount of money donated between 2003 and 2010 to groups that question the science behind climate change. And get this, from 2006 to 2010, the share of the US public that believe climate change is occurring dropped by 13 percentage points. John, is the climate debate manufactured?
No, not at all. That statistic is one of the worst numbers I've ever seen.
Oh, really?
I mean, I've actually studied this question, and he basically added up all the money that is given to conservative organizations over a period of years. Most of these organizations do very little work at all with climate change. He says not all the money is spent on climate change, and what he should have said is, yeah, like more than 90% of the money isn't spent on climate change. There are groups like the Hoover Institution that barely does anything on it. He has them in there.
I'd like to share some different numbers, which is that we have currently 182 members of Congress who deny that climate change is a problem, who have received $75 million in donations that we know about from fossil-fueled energy interests. So public debate aside, there is a concerted effort to get policymakers to say that they deny climate and to thwart actions that would stop climate change.
But I think when people say that they're skeptics on climate, it's not that we don't think that the climate is changing. It's that we don't know how much it's going to change. We don't know how much it's going to warm. And there's a big disagreement about what policies you use. And there's been an attempt to say that if the greenhouse effect is real, we must do all these things.
But John, there is, I'm sorry to interrupt, there is a big difference between waiting to see when the evidence is conclusive, we must follow this pathway, and the urgency of now. We have to do a whole suite of taking action from preparedness to reducing carbon pollution now.
We're going to talk about that a little bit more later on, but for now it's time for our next statistic. There are tons of ways that we can do our part to combat climate change, but is any of it really enough? The numbers are kind of depressing here. Here's a chart showing the number of metric tons of CO2 emissions you'd save over a lifetime by taking green initiatives. Increasing your car's fuel economy from 20 to 30 miles per gallon, you'll save 148 metric tons. If you use energy-saving light bulbs, you'll save around about 36 tons. Recycling paper, plastic and cans nets you 17 tons. If you have just one less child, you stand to reduce 9,441 metric tons of CO2 emissions. So are we the problem? Let's ask Les Knight. He is the leader of the voluntary human extinction movement. His group believes the climate crisis may be a reproductive crisis, and until you combat overpopulation, you'll never combat climate change. Welcome, Les.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about your organisation?
Well, yes, it's a very simple idea. We are recommending that everybody think before they procreate. And if people really think it all the way through, probably won't.
That's
really
probably
no reason
advice
to.
that everyone should consider, even aside from climate change, right?
Right. There are a billion people without electricity. There are a billion people hungry. We're not taking care of the people who are here already. Planet Earth would be far better off, the biosphere, if there were no Homo sapiens.
No Homo sapiens?
No, none at all.
So it's extinction, not depopulation?
Right. Well, we're causing the extinctions of tens of thousands of other species. What's one more?
What does everyone here think about that?
Hi, my name is Paris. And when you were saying that, we shouldn't procreate, I was thinking about like places in China where they had, laws enforced about them having
One-child policy, right?
Right, but their air is like 10 times worse than ours. So I'm still trying to understand how that helps.
Right, that's an excellent question because it's estimated there are 400 million fewer Chinese residents than there would be if they hadn't instituted that harsh policy.
But it is a harsh policy, right? It was considered a human rights abuse by some.
It is, and dying of starvation could be considered a human rights abuse too, and they have had some serious famines. By not procreating as much, they were able to increase their economy. Their standard of living is higher, which it should be. I mean, they've been having it harsh.
Let's talk about some slightly less extreme measures. Let's talk about recycling, because I think it's something that immediately comes to mind for a lot of people who think about climate change. Who here recycles? Pretty much everybody. John, do you recycle religiously?
Not at all.
Why not? Why not?
Because I think recycling is mostly a waste of time. It makes sense for paper and for metals like aluminum, but this has been one of my hobby horses, that it really costs cities a lot of money to recycle because it's a lot cheaper to put it in a landfill. And it doesn't really do that much for the environment, especially when you get into stuff like plastic and these exotic things that really raise the cost of waste disposal.
I think we have a waste problem in this country. The average person produces 4 pounds of garbage a day. And so what we need to do is start reducing the amount of waste that goes into a landfill. Landfills leak. They leak toxins into our air, into our water. They're the 3rd largest source of man-made methane emissions in this country. We haven't talked about methane, but it is a super pollutant second only to carbon dioxide. And the landfills that we have now, even under the best technology, don't adequately capture all of those toxins. So the more that we can prevent from getting into landfills in the first place, the better off we'll be.
Let's see if there are any questions from the audience. Yeah.
We've been told for years that recycling is an answer. So how are we not supposed to be confused by all the mixed messages?
There's not one thing that you can do that's going to change the planet. There are a series of options that you can take to save the planet. I think recycling is a good option. John actually had mentioned casually that some items he thinks should be recycled. And those items, so I think we can agree a little bit on this, right? There are some items that contribute to this methane pollution that should be recycled. So food waste, paper.
Not food waste. I disagree.
Well,
with
okay,
food waste.
well,
That's
there
the
we
big
disagree.
one.
Organic materials like yard clippings. So there are a lot of
Not
things.
yard clippings.
Okay, well, we disagree. But I would offer that these items, when you put them in a landfill, yield the highest amounts of methane and cause short-term climate problems that we have to prevent. So I would recycle. I do recycle.
All right, that does it for this edition of The Business of Life. I'd like to thank our panellists for joining us, Kim, Danielle, John, and our special guest, Les Knight. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on The Business of Life. Bye-bye.
Business of Life is made possible by Better Money Habits. It's a free resource that helps you build practical knowledge and take control of your finances. Powered by Bank of America. See more at bettermoneyhabits.com.